Hi everyone, my name is Emma and I'm 22 years old. I know what you're thinking. Another sob story about family drama, right? Well, buckle up, because this one's going to be a wild ride. What I'm about to tell you happened just 2 months ago at my college graduation, and honestly, I'm still processing everything that went down. But first, let me give you some context about my family situation, because without understanding the background, you won't fully appreciate the nuclear bomb I dropped on graduation day. I grew up in what looked like the perfect suburban family from the outside. My parents, David and Margaret Thompson, were both successful professionals. Dad's a corporate lawyer, Mom's a pediatric surgeon. We lived in a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood, took family vacations to Europe, and from all appearances, we had it made. But here's the thing about appearances. They can be incredibly deceiving. My sister Jessica is 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, it was like I became invisible. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Jessica was treated like a princess, while I was treated like the hired help. It wasn't subtle favoritism, either. It was blatant, obvious, and soul-crushing. Let me paint you a picture of what my childhood looked like. When Jessica wanted to take piano lessons, my parents immediately bought her a brand new baby grand piano that cost more than most people's cars. When I asked if I could take guitar lessons, they said we couldn't afford it, and handed me a used acoustic guitar from a garage sale that was missing 2 strings. When Jessica expressed interest in horseback riding, they bought her a horse, an actual horse, and paid for premium boarding at an exclusive equestrian facility. When I wanted to join the school soccer team, they said the equipment was too expensive, and I should find a cheaper hobby. The pattern continued throughout our entire childhood. Jessica got designer clothes, while I got hand-me-downs from cousins. Jessica got her own car for her 16th birthday, a brand new BMW, while I had to work part-time jobs to save up for a beat-up Honda with 200,000 miles on it. Jessica's birthday parties were elaborate affairs with professional party planners, while my birthdays were usually forgotten entirely or acknowledged with a hastily purchased cake from the grocery store. But it wasn't just about money. The emotional favoritism was even worse. Jessica could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. She could come home drunk at 15, crash her car, get suspended from school for cheating, and my parents would make excuses for her and blame everyone else. Meanwhile, if I came home 5 minutes past curfew, I was grounded for a month. If I got a B+ on a test, I was lectured about not applying myself. If I forgot to do a chore, I was labeled irresponsible and lazy. I spent years trying to win my parents' approval and affection. I got straight A's all through high school, volunteered at the local animal shelter, participated in debate team, and worked part-time jobs to pay for my own expenses. None of it mattered. Jessica would fail a class, and my parents would hire expensive tutors and blame the teachers. I would win academic awards, and my parents would barely acknowledge it. The breaking point for me came during my senior year of high school when it was time to apply for colleges. I had worked incredibly hard to maintain a 4.0 GPA, and had been accepted to several prestigious universities. My dream school was Stanford, and I had been accepted with a partial scholarship. I needed about $30,000 per year to cover the remaining costs. When I excitedly told my parents about my acceptance and asked for help with the finances, they sat me down for what they called a realistic conversation about money. They explained that college was expensive, and they needed to be practical about their financial commitments. They said they could help me with community college or a state school, but Stanford was unnecessarily expensive and not a good investment. I was devastated, but I understood that $120,000 was a lot of money. I accepted their decision and enrolled in our state university instead, taking out student loans to cover what they wouldn't pay. I told myself that it was fair, that they were being responsible with their money, and that I could still get a good education at a state school. Then, 8 months later, Jessica announced that she wanted to go to fashion design school in Paris. Not just any fashion design school, the most expensive, exclusive program you could imagine. The total cost for 4 years would be over $300,000, not including living expenses, in one of the world's most expensive cities. I waited for my parents to have the same realistic conversation about money with Jessica that they'd had with me. I waited for them to suggest more affordable alternatives or discuss the practical return on investment for such an expensive program. Instead, they immediately started making arrangements to pay for everything. Not only did they agree to cover all of Jessica's tuition and living expenses, but they also bought her a luxury apartment in Paris, gave her a $5,000 monthly allowance for miscellaneous expenses, and took her on a shopping spree to buy a designer wardrobe for her new life abroad. When I asked my parents how they could afford Jessica's education when they couldn't afford to help me with Stanford, my mother actually said, "Jessica's program is an investment in her future. She has real artistic talent that needs to be nurtured. Your situation is different." Different how? Because I wanted to study engineering instead of fashion? Because I had actually worked hard in school instead of coasting by on charm and manipulation? The double standard was so blatant and hurtful that I could barely process it. That conversation changed everything for me. I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked or how much I achieved, I would never be the daughter they were proud of. Jessica would always be their precious princess, and I would always be an afterthought. So I made a decision. I stopped trying to win their approval. I stopped calling home regularly, stopped asking for their help with anything, and started building my own life, completely independent of their support or validation. I worked multiple jobs throughout college, lived in the cheapest housing I could find, and ate ramen noodles for dinner most nights. It was hard, but it was also liberating in a way. Jessica, meanwhile, was living it up in Paris. Her Instagram was filled with photos of designer clothes, expensive restaurants, and exotic vacations, funded entirely by our parents. She posted pictures of her luxury apartment, her shopping hauls, and her glamorous lifestyle with captions about following your dreams and living your best life. What she didn't post about was how she was failing most of her classes and spending more time partying than actually studying. My parents would call me occasionally to brag about Jessica's amazing experience in Paris and how proud they were of her for pursuing her passion. They never asked about my classes, my job, or my life. When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in mechanical engineering and was offered a position at a top engineering firm, they barely acknowledged it. But when Jessica posted a photo of a dress she had sketched, they shared it on Facebook with a post about how talented and creative their daughter was. The final straw came 6 months before my graduation, when Jessica announced that she was dropping out of fashion school to find herself and travel around Europe for a year. She had completed less than 2 years of her program and had failed most of her classes, but she was bored and wanted to do something else. Instead of being upset about the wasted money or disappointed in her lack of commitment, my parents were supportive and understanding. They agreed to continue funding her European adventure and told her to take all the time she needs to figure out her path in life. Meanwhile, I was working 30 hours a week while maintaining a perfect GPA and completing a senior thesis project that my professor said was graduate-level work. I was exhausted, stressed, and struggling financially, but I was proud of what I was accomplishing. I had job interviews lined up with top companies and was on track to graduate with the highest honors. But none of that mattered to my parents. They were too busy planning Jessica's next adventure to notice or care about my achievements. That's when I started planning my graduation surprise. I knew my parents would attend my graduation ceremony, not because they were particularly proud of me, but because it would look bad to their friends if they didn't show up. I also knew that they would expect me to be grateful for their presence and to thank them publicly for their support throughout my college years. I had other plans. Let me tell you about the months of preparation that went into this moment. First, I had to gather evidence. See, my parents had always been very careful about their public image. They donated to charity, attended community events, and presented themselves as loving, supportive parents. They were particularly proud of their reputation in our hometown, where Dad was a respected member of the Rotary Club, and Mom was known for her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. I started by going through old family photos and documents. I collected evidence of the disparate treatment Jessica and I had received over the years. I found receipts for Jessica's horse, her car, her Paris apartment, and her monthly allowances. I calculated that my parents had spent over $500,000 on Jessica's lifestyle and education, while they had contributed less than $30,000 to mine. I also reached out to family, friends, and relatives who had witnessed the favoritism over the years. Many of them had noticed the different treatment, but had never said anything out of politeness. They were willing to provide statements about what they had observed. Most importantly, I managed to get copies of Jessica's academic records from her Paris school. Don't ask me how. Let's just say I have a very helpful friend who works in international student services. The records showed that she had failed most of her classes and had been placed on academic probation multiple times before dropping out. I also documented Jessica's current lifestyle. Her social media posts made it clear that she was spending thousands of dollars per month on shopping, dining, and entertainment, while claiming to be finding herself through travel. I calculated that my parents were spending approximately $8,000 per month to fund her European vacation. The next step was planning the actual reveal. I knew I would have the opportunity to give a short speech at the graduation reception, as I was graduating as the valedictorian of my engineering program. Normally, these speeches are generic thank you messages to parents and professors. I had something different in mind. I also sent invitations to the graduation ceremony and reception to extended family members, family friends, and neighbors, people who knew our family but might not have been aware of the full extent of the favoritism. I wanted as large an audience as possible for what I was about to do. The weeks leading up to graduation were surreal. My parents called to congratulate me on being selected as valedictorian and said they were looking forward to the ceremony. They talked about having a nice dinner afterward and how proud they were of my accomplishments. The irony was almost too much to bear. Jessica even called from whatever European city she was currently in to say she was sorry she couldn't make it to my graduation, but that she was super proud of me. She was at a music festival in Prague with friends, funded by our parents' credit card, and couldn't be bothered to attend her sister's graduation. The morning of graduation day, I woke up feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. I had spent 4 years working toward this moment, not just the graduation itself, but the reckoning that would follow. I put on my cap and gown, took a deep breath, and headed to campus. The ceremony itself was beautiful. It was held in our university's historic quadrangle, with families seated in folding chairs on the lawn, and graduates processed in wearing their caps and gowns. I could see my parents in the audience, smiling and taking photos. Dad was wearing his best suit, and Mom had on a new dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. When they called my name as valedictorian and announced that I was graduating summa cum laude with a perfect 4.0 GPA, my parents stood up and applauded. For a moment, I almost felt bad about what I was planning to do. They looked genuinely proud and happy. But then I remembered all the times they had dismissed my achievements, all the times they had chosen Jessica over me, all the times they had made me feel like I wasn't worth their investment or attention. I remembered the Stanford rejection and Jessica's Paris adventure. I remembered every birthday they forgot and every accomplishment they ignored. My resolve strengthened. The reception was held in the university's Alumni Center, a beautiful building with large windows and elegant decorations. There were probably 200 people in attendance: graduates, family members, professors, and university staff. Everyone was mingling, eating appetizers, and celebrating. I spent the first hour of the reception playing the part of the grateful daughter. I smiled for photos with my parents, thanked them for coming, and made polite conversation with their friends. Several people congratulated me on my achievements and told my parents how proud they must be. "Oh, we are so proud," my mother kept saying. "Emma has always been such a dedicated student. We've always supported her dreams." Every word felt like a knife twisting in my stomach, but I smiled and nodded. Finally, it was time for the speeches. The department head spoke first, talking about our graduating class and our bright futures. Then, it was my turn. I walked to the podium, looked out at the crowd of smiling faces, and saw my parents beaming with pride in the front row. Dad had his phone out, ready to record my speech. Mom was practically glowing. I began with the expected pleasantries. I thanked the professors, acknowledged my classmates, and talked about our shared experiences over the past 4 years. The audience was relaxed and attentive. Then I shifted gears. "Before I continue," I said, "I want to take a moment to talk about the importance of family support in achieving our goals. Many of you have parents here today who have sacrificed and invested in your education, who have supported your dreams even when they were expensive or impractical. Those of you who have parents like that should feel very grateful." I could see my parents nodding along, probably thinking I was about to thank them publicly for their support. "Unfortunately," I continued, "not all of us have been that fortunate. Some of us have had to learn the hard way that family support is conditional, that love and investment are not distributed equally among siblings, and that sometimes the people who should believe in you the most are the ones who believe in you the least." The room was getting quieter now. People were starting to sense that this wasn't going to be a typical valedictorian speech. 4 years ago, I was accepted to Stanford University with a partial scholarship. It was my dream school, and I had worked incredibly hard to earn that acceptance. I went to my parents, excited and hopeful, and asked for their help with the remaining costs. I was told that Stanford was too expensive, that I needed to be more practical, and that they couldn't afford to help me with such an expensive education. I could see my parents' faces starting to change. Dad had lowered his phone. Mom was looking confused and slightly panicked. So I accepted their financial limitations and enrolled here instead. I took out student loans, worked multiple jobs, and ate ramen noodles for dinner most nights. I told myself that my parents were being responsible with their money and that I should be grateful for whatever help they could provide. The room was completely silent now. Everyone was hanging on every word. 8 months later, my younger sister decided she wanted to attend fashion design school in Paris. Not just any fashion school, the most expensive program she could find. The total cost was over $300,000, not including living expenses in one of the world's most expensive cities. I pulled out a folder from behind the podium and opened it. I waited for my parents to have the same conversation with my sister that they had with me about being practical and financially responsible. Instead, they immediately agreed to pay for everything. They bought her a luxury apartment in Paris, gave her a $5,000 monthly allowance, and took her shopping for a designer wardrobe. My mother was now visibly distressed, looking around at the other attendees who were staring at our family with fascination and horror. "But it gets better," I continued. After less than 2 years of failing most of her classes, my sister decided to drop out of school to find herself by traveling around Europe. Instead of being disappointed about the wasted money, my parents agreed to continue funding her European vacation to the tune of about $8,000 per month. I held up a stack of papers. I have here copies of my sister's academic records from her Paris school, showing her repeated failures and academic probation. I also have bank statements showing the money my parents have spent on her lifestyle over the past 3 years. The total comes to over $500,000. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. My parents looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Meanwhile, I have worked 30 hours a week while maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA. I am graduating summa cum laude with a degree in mechanical engineering and have already accepted a position with a top firm. I have achieved all of this with less than $30,000 in support from my parents over 4 years. I looked directly at my parents. The total investment in my education and success? $30,000. The total investment in my sister's failed fashion career and European vacation? Over $500,000. The message this sends about my worth versus my sister's worth? Priceless. Several people in the audience gasped. I could see some of my parents' friends looking shocked and uncomfortable. So when my parents stand up and take credit for my success today, when they post on social media about how proud they are of their daughter's achievements, when they tell their friends about how they've always supported my dreams, I want everyone here to know the truth about what that support actually looked like. My father started to stand up, probably to try to stop me or leave, but I wasn't finished. I also want to address the elephant in the room, I said. Many of you are probably wondering why I would air my family's dirty laundry in such a public way. It's a fair question, and I'll tell you why. I took a deep breath. For years, I tried to earn my parents' love and approval through achievement and good behavior. I thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I was just successful enough, they would finally see my worth. But I've learned that you can't earn love from people who have already decided you're not worth their investment. Tears were starting to form in my eyes, but I pushed through. I'm not doing this for revenge, although I know that's how it might look. I'm doing this for every kid who has ever felt like they weren't good enough, who has ever watched their parents invest in their siblings' dreams while dismissing their own, who has ever been made to feel like they were asking for too much when they asked for the same support their sibling received without question. I looked around the room at all the faces staring back at me. I'm doing this because silence enables this kind of treatment to continue. I'm doing this because favoritism and emotional neglect shouldn't be hidden behind closed doors and polite family facades. And I'm doing this because I finally have the platform and the courage to tell my truth. I closed the folder and set it aside. To my fellow graduates who have been truly supported by their families, cherish that gift and don't take it for granted. To those who have had to support themselves and prove their worth without family backing, you are stronger than you know, and your achievements are yours alone. I looked one more time at my parents, who were now both crying and looked completely devastated. To my parents, I hope someday you'll understand the damage you've done and the opportunities you've missed to have a real relationship with both of your daughters. But I'm not going to wait for that day anymore. I'm moving forward with my life, my career, and my own definition of success. I paused for a moment, then concluded with the traditional closing. Thank you all for being here today to celebrate this achievement with us. Congratulations to my fellow graduates, and good luck in all your future endeavors. I stepped back from the podium to complete silence. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved or said anything. Then, slowly, a few people started clapping. The applause grew until most of the room was applauding, although it was subdued and somewhat uncomfortable. I walked back to my seat, my heart pounding and my hands shaking. I had done it! I had finally said everything I had wanted to say for years. The aftermath was immediate and intense. As soon as the formal reception ended, people started approaching me. Some were supportive, telling me how brave I was and sharing their own stories of family favoritism. Others were clearly uncomfortable and didn't know what to say. My parents, meanwhile, were surrounded by their friends and neighbors, all of whom had heard every word of my speech. I could see them trying to explain and make excuses, but the damage was done. Everyone now knew the truth about how they had treated their daughters. Several family members approached me throughout the evening. My aunt pulled me aside and told me that she had always suspected there was favoritism, but had never realized how extreme it was. She apologized for not speaking up sooner and said she was proud of me for having the courage to tell my story. My grandmother, my father's mother, was particularly upset. She had always wondered why I seemed distant from the family and why Jessica always seemed to have more opportunities. She told me that she was ashamed of how her son had treated me and that she wished I had felt comfortable coming to her sooner. But the most surprising reaction came from some of Jessica's friends who were at the reception. Several of them approached me to say that they had always felt uncomfortable with how much money Jessica spent and how little she seemed to appreciate it. They said they had tried to talk to her about getting a job or taking her education more seriously, but she had dismissed their concerns. My parents, meanwhile, tried to approach me several times during the evening, but I wasn't ready to talk to them. Every time they got close, I moved to another part of the room or started talking to someone else. I could see the hurt and confusion in their eyes, but I wasn't prepared to have that conversation yet. The evening finally ended, and I went home to my small apartment feeling emotionally exhausted, but also strangely relieved. I had carried the weight of that speech for months, and now it was out in the world. Whatever happened next, at least I had told my truth. The next few days were a whirlwind. Word of my graduation speech spread quickly through our hometown and extended family network. Some people were supportive and reached out to congratulate me on my courage. Others were critical and felt that I had handled the situation inappropriately. My parents called repeatedly, leaving voicemails asking me to come home so we could talk. They said they wanted to explain their side of the story and work things out as a family. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, so I didn't return their calls. Jessica called me from Europe, furious about the speech. She accused me of being jealous and vindictive, and said I had embarrassed the family for no reason. She claimed that our parents had always supported me, and that I was being ungrateful and dramatic. Her reaction was actually exactly what I had expected, and it reinforced my decision to speak out. Jessica had never had to work for anything in her life, so she couldn't understand why I might be upset about the disparate treatment we had received. About a week after graduation, I received a long email from my parents. They apologized for any pain they had caused and acknowledged that they had made mistakes in how they had treated Jessica and me differently. However, they also defended many of their decisions and suggested that I had misinterpreted their intentions. The email was frustrating because it felt like they were still missing the point. They seemed to think this was about money or fairness, when really it was about love, respect, and feeling valued as their daughter. I wrote back a shorter response, thanking them for the apology, but explaining that I needed more time and space to process everything before we could have a productive conversation about our relationship. 2 weeks after graduation, I started my new job at the engineering firm. It was an amazing opportunity, and I threw myself into the work. My colleagues were brilliant and supportive, and I felt like I was finally in an environment where my efforts and achievements were recognized and valued. About a month into my new job, I received a surprise visitor at my apartment. It was my grandmother, who had driven 3 hours to see me. She brought with her a photo album filled with pictures of me throughout my childhood and school years. "I've been thinking about your speech," she said, "and I realized that I have been complicit in this situation by not speaking up when I saw what was happening. I want you to know that I have always been proud of you, and I'm sorry that your parents haven't made that clear." We spent the afternoon going through the photo album, and she told me stories about my childhood that I had forgotten. She reminded me of all my achievements and milestones and how excited she had always been about my potential. She said as she was leaving, "I've been putting money aside for your wedding someday, but I think you could use it now more than later. I want to help you pay off some of those student loans." She handed me a check for $25,000. I started crying, not just because of the money, but because it was the first time in years that a family member had made a gesture that showed they believed in me and my future. That visit from my grandmother was a turning point for me. It reminded me that while my parents had failed me in many ways, I wasn't completely alone in the world. There were people who cared about me and were proud of my achievements. Over the next few months, I started to rebuild relationships with extended family members who had reached out after my graduation speech. I also began seeing a therapist to work through some of the emotional damage from years of feeling like I wasn't good enough for my parents' love and investment. Jessica eventually returned from Europe, and according to family gossip, she was struggling to figure out what to do with her life. The fashion school experience had been a failure, and she had no real skills or work experience to fall back on. My parents were pressuring her to either go back to school or get a job, but she was resistant to both options. As for my parents, we had a few difficult conversations over the phone, but we never really resolved the underlying issues. They continued to defend their parenting choices and seemed to believe that their different treatment of Jessica and me was justified by our different personalities and needs. I realized that I might never get the acknowledgement and apology I was looking for from them, and I had to decide whether I could have a relationship with them anyway. It's an ongoing process that I'm still working through with my therapist. The most important thing that came out of this whole experience was the realization that I don't need my parents' validation to be successful or happy. I have built a life for myself that I'm proud of, and I have surrounded myself with people who appreciate and support me. I also learned that sometimes you have to be willing to burn bridges in order to stand up for yourself and your truth. My graduation speech was a nuclear option, and it permanently changed my relationship with my family. But it also freed me from years of trying to earn love and approval that was never going to come. Looking back now, 2 months later, I don't regret giving that speech. It was scary and uncomfortable, and it created a lot of drama and hurt feelings, but it was also liberating and empowering in ways I hadn't expected. I've received messages from dozens of people who heard about my story secondhand and wanted to share their own experiences with family favoritism and conditional love. Many of them said that my speech inspired them to have difficult conversations with their own families or to set boundaries they had been afraid to set. I've also heard from several young people who are currently experiencing similar situations with their parents. I try to offer them support and advice, and I always encourage them to prioritize their own mental health and well-being over family harmony. The engineering job has been going incredibly well. I'm working on fascinating projects, learning new skills every day, and earning a salary that allows me to live comfortably and pay down my student loans quickly. I'm also putting money aside for graduate school, which I plan to pay for entirely on my own. Jessica and I still don't have much of a relationship. She's currently living at home with our parents and working part-time at a local boutique while trying to figure out her next steps. According to my grandmother, she's been struggling with the transition from her pampered lifestyle in Europe to the reality of adult responsibilities. Part of me feels bad for Jessica, because I think our parents did her a disservice by never requiring her to work hard or face consequences for her actions. She's now 22 years old with no real skills, no work ethic, and no idea how to function independently. In some ways, the favoritism hurt her too, just in different ways. But I also recognize that Jessica is an adult who is responsible for her own choices and growth. I can't save her from the consequences of her actions any more than I could force my parents to treat us equally when we were kids. As for my parents, I think they're finally starting to understand the impact of their parenting choices, but change is slow and difficult. They've made some efforts to reach out and rebuild our relationship, but they still struggle to fully acknowledge the damage they caused. I'm hopeful that someday we'll be able to have a healthier relationship, but I'm not willing to sacrifice my own well-being or pretend that the past didn't happen in order to make that possible. The biggest lesson I've learned from this whole experience is the importance of advocating for yourself, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. For years, I suffered in silence because I didn't want to rock the boat or cause family drama. But staying silent only allowed the harmful patterns to continue. Speaking up was scary and came with consequences, but it also gave me back my power and my voice. It allowed me to stop being a victim of circumstances and start being the author of my own story. I also learned that you can't control how other people treat you, but you can control how you respond to that treatment. I spent years trying to change my parents' behavior through my own achievements and good behavior, but that was never going to work because the problem was with them, not with me. Once I accepted that I couldn't change them and focused instead on building my own life and success, everything became clearer and easier. If you're in a similar situation with your family, my advice is to prioritize your own mental health and well-being above everything else. Set boundaries that protect your emotional safety. And don't be afraid to enforce those boundaries, even if it causes conflict. Surround yourself with people who appreciate and support you. And don't waste your energy trying to earn love from people who have already shown you that their love is conditional. Most importantly, remember that your worth is not determined by how your family treats you. You are valuable and deserving of love and respect, regardless of whether your parents recognize that or not. I'm still working through the aftermath of my graduation speech and rebuilding my relationships with family members who do support me. It's an ongoing process, and some days are harder than others, but I'm proud of myself for finally speaking my truth, and I'm excited about the future I'm building for myself. I have a career I'm passionate about, relationships that are based on mutual respect and support, and a sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on anyone else's validation. That graduation speech was the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. It was painful and difficult, but it was also necessary and ultimately liberating. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything in order to gain yourself. So, there you have it. My graduation surprise that nobody saw coming, least of all my parents. It's been a wild journey, and I'm still processing everything that's happened since that day. Some people think I went too far, others think I didn't go far enough. But at the end of the day, I finally stood up for myself and told my truth, and that's something I'll never regret. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more revenge tales like this one, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I love reading your comments and hearing your own stories, so don't be shy about sharing your experiences in the comments below. Trust me, we've all got family drama. Some of us just handle it more publicly than others. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.